welcome to the first ever episode of Not Now I'm Reading, your one-stop shop for all things genre. My name is Chelsea.
And I'm Kay.
And welcome to our first episode, our inaugural podcast. Thank you for those of you who followed us over from Sisterhood of the Traveling Paperbacks or from our other various internet homes. This podcast is basically just going to be Kay and I's place to come and talk about all the genre and fandom things that are making us happy. We acknowledge that nothing is perfect, but we can still love the things we love really hard while talking about the issues that we have with them. So basically, we are here to talk about books, and we'll do some movies and comic books and other things as they pop up.
But mostly books.
Mostly books. Mostly books. Every other week will definitely be books. Maybe 3 out of 4, depending on how the reading's going.
Yeah.
The general rules of the podcast are we are sweary and we are proudly feminist. And this is a space that is going to be free of cishet white men in publishing. There are plenty of spaces on the internet for you to find those various things. This is not that spot. We wish you well.
For you. Happy trails, friend.
Yes, we wish you well. You will find somewhere on the internet to be, but we are here for everybody else who's ready to talk about diverse things and intersectionality and fandom and pop culture and all of the things that we love to read and consume. So on that note, let's talk about what we are reading and consuming. Kay, I'm going to make you go first because you always have so many things that you're reading.
You always have so many things that I'm reading. Let's see. We'll just do like a nice little rundown. I just reread for about the millionth time Act Like It by Lucy Parker, which is one of my go-to recommendations for new romance readers. It's a contemporary romance. There's fake dating. It's set in the London theater scene, and it's amazing. I don't really want to spoiler it too much, but like it's definitely one of the things that I say. It's not super long, it's contemporary, it's very cute. There's like just enough twists and turns without it being like really that's the twist you were going with, which can happen sometimes because contemporary romance we'll just not go there. Like some of the tropes that people decide to throw in, I'm like, maybe this should have been a fantasy. I don't know.
Maybe, just throwing that out there.
And I'm also rereading Emma because, of course, I am. I almost always read all of Jane Austen's books in a calendar year, and I have most of them on audio as well. So I'm doing the audio right now, and it's read by Juliet Stevenson, who's a phenomenal narrator. She's really great. So those are the books that I'm reading. Also, I just finished rereading The Martian, but like everybody has heard of The Martian.
That's always a solid choice.
You don't need to hear me talking about that. Okay, so since I just like speed reread The Martian and also watched the movie the other day, I was rereading some of my old favorite fics from that fandom, and one that I recommend to anyone who has seen the movie or read the book. Even if you're not a fan fiction person, it's really great. It's called You Know You Have a Permanent Piece of My Medium-Sized American Heart. It's by Tricatular. This fic is really great. It's basically about Mark coming back with the crew on the Hermes, and it's sort of a social media fic. How do you explain those? Like, there's like a lot of like... It's got like Tumblr posts and Twitter posts, and also there's like people asking questions at press conferences where it's just dialogue. But it's multimedia fandom fic. I don't know how else to describe this. It's great. It's really funny. It's actually like really surprisingly poignant. Like there's at one point in one of the data dumps, they get a bunch of like things that like fans of Mark Watney have like said or written, because you know obviously Mark Watney would have like rabid fangirls on the internet, and one of them is this really lovely like fake Tumblr post about like how Mark Watney's where like it's this lovely little thing saying like they're really lucky that if anyone was gonna get stuck on Mars, it was pretty great that it was Mark Watney, but it ends with, so let's not treat these logs as just the latest show to binge watch. Mark Watney wanted to live and he didn't want to be alone. He's not alone. None of us are alone. That's what these logs mean. And like I remember the first time I read this just being like, oh god, like I'm getting really emotional about like fictional Tumblr post like, about The Martian.
But it's so good though.
And yeah, you should go read it. It's hilarious. Mark Watney, Cinnamon Roll, Too Good for This World, Too Pure.
Too pure. And of
Too
course,
pure.
we will have all links in the show notes. So click on over and definitely give that a read. All right. Well, I've been reading a bunch of things. I reread Every Heart a Doorway for the BookTube SFF Awards, and it was just as delightful as the first time.
Obviously.
And made me really excited that the second one is getting ready to come out because Jack and Jill are my favorite characters from the first book. So the fact that the second novella is about them. Yes, by Shauna Maguire, about, for those of you who haven't heard, it's about basically what happens to the kids who go through the magic doors into fairyland, who go kind of on those adventures, what happens when they come back to our world.
Poor returned
Eleanor,
fantasy kids.
And Eleanor West opens up basically a home for them. She is looking for her own magical door back to the world she visited. And while the parents of these kids might think that they are crazy or depressed or suffering from various real life mental illnesses, they have in fact actually been to different fantasy worlds. And so it's kind of about that and about them. The next novella in the series is getting ready to come out. It is called Down Among the Sticks and Bones, and it focuses on two characters from Every Heart a Doorway. It's fantastic. It's only like 130 pages long or something like that, 150 pages. So it's
really
super short.
She's really been killing it with the novella length stuff recently.
Yeah,
I mean, as always.
She's just been killing it.
But
yeah.
like, also, she wrote Asmira Grant Final Girls that came out fairly recently, and that's one of my favorite reads of the year so far.
Also, an A+ to Shauna and her publisher, because they included like pretty much literally every single Toby Day book and short story in the Hugo packet.
I think they included all.
I'm pretty sure it's every single one.
Like it
which
would cost
if
you
you have
$100, I think, to buy all of them.
Which is crazy. And that's just one part. If you have more interest in the Hugos, stay tuned. We have a special episode coming. But yes, that was really awesome to see that it wasn't just like excerpts. It was like everything. And I was like, holy shit. Like, that's a lot of books. But then I also read a middle grade novel called Star-Crossed by Barbara D. And I don't know if you saw any of like the dust up around this on Twitter when it happened. But basically Barbara D was asked to come to a school to give a talk. And then when she got there, she gave a talk. And Star-Crossed is about a young girl named Maddie who basically realizes that she might be bisexual and that she might have a crush on, or in fact does have a crush on, one of the new girls in school. And they're performing Romeo and Juliet as their 8th grade play. And it's adorable. It's incredibly cute. But it deals with, sexuality and burgeoning, and sexuality as you're kind of growing into your identity. And the school had asked her not to speak about that, to talk about the book without talking about the sexuality parts of it, which,
you can guess our feelings about that.
Yeah, is basically total bullshit. Yeah, is total bullshit, not to put too fine a point on it. And so I had not actually heard of this book until I read her article about it. And what is both incredibly endearing, but also makes the situation even sadder, is that she actually wrote it kind of with her daughter in mind. The author's daughter is, I think, now in 9th or 10th grade, but at the time was in 8th grade and was beginning to identify as bisexual and to kind of explore that about herself. And so the author wrote this book to kind of help her see herself in books and to help her work through that. And she consulted with her daughter on a lot of it, which is so precious and incredibly sweet. And the book is adorable, and it's actually really cute because as the book is going, it's doing this summation of Romeo and Juliet, which like you'd think as an adult reader would get kind of annoying because obviously like what Romeo and Juliet is about. But also it's actually very cute because it requires you to realize that there was a time when you didn't necessarily know what that was about, like before that story had entered your consciousness just as like a story. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
That's lovely.
It was lovely. Go pick it up. Go give the author some dollars or find it at your library. It's really cute. It's also, moves fairly quickly because it's middle grade. I really recommend it. And then the last book we're going to talk about. Okay. We're going to talk about A Court of Mist and Fury for like 5 seconds.
Yikes.
Because
I
don't know how I
feel
about this book.
Who has read all of one Sarah J. Maas book. I'm not reading any more of them.
But this is my thing. And here's the thing about it is I've never had the experience where I've so hated the first book and then yet turned around and so enjoyed the second book.
Really?
Which is kind of throwing me for like an existential loop just because it's never happened before.
Here's the thing with that. If you hate a book really badly, you almost never read the second book.
And that is very true. And that is kind of what makes me so sad, is because I can never recommend this series. Like, the first book is such utter trash fire. It's about emotionally abusive and manipulative relationships.
About, like, some of the word choices that were made, and just
it's
almost
really bad.
Falling down laughing.
It's really bad. Like, Sarah J. Maas includes like sex scenes in these books, which I think on the first hand is commendable, because these books are written for older teens. And just in general, I am in favor of accurate depictions of healthy sexual relationships in teen books.
Hallelujah.
Like, I am pro that. However, these are really bad. Like, they're just really bad.
Really bad.
So, like, I can't really endorse them because of that, but like, yay for trying, Sarah. Good on you, but I just loved the second one so much. And it's a Hades and Persephone retelling.
I'm always down for a Hades and Persephone retelling.
Yeah, and like, it's pretty good. And like, my thing is that the shipping is whatever. Like, you can feel how you feel about Reese, kind of her new love interest, and there's a lot of emotional development and kind of retconning of some really shitty stuff he does in the first book into the second book. So like, that is what it is. But the character of Farah, the main female character, her character arc of development is like amazing. It is aces. I loved it. I just thought she was such a badass. She is the character that I want to see all of these young adult strong heroine books trying to do. Like, this, like, that's something that Sarah J. Maas is getting right here. So I really enjoyed it, but I have complicated feelings about it. Y'all should come and find me on social media to talk to me about it.
I feel like if you want to read a Hades and Persephone retelling, you should just go read Alicia Ray's Hot as Hades. And
also, yes, but I just feel like that's because Alicia Ray always is like a stamp of approval wreck.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's the last book I've been reading. That left me with some complicated feelings. So I decided to go and read a fan fiction that left me with no complicated feelings. It's a reread. It's Never Been Kissed by the Hoyden and 20-something, which is
just like happy
which is an
sighs
RPF hockey fandom, which is just so good. It is like the slowest of slow burns. It's almost 167,000 words long, like just shy of that. So it is like,
I basically threw Chelsea really into the deep end of this fandom with my first couple of friends.
Like, this was like, I almost feel like you did me a little of a disservice, because this shit was so good that like that bar got set real high. And I'm not saying I have not super enjoyed a lot of other hockey RPF fiction that I have read, but like, damn.
I would 100% buy that as an original like novel. Just like
that's what I was literally just thinking. Like, if this were about fictional hockey players and hockey teams, and you just, like you said, file the serial numbers off and change the names, I would pay money for this. Yeah. I would buy this, and I would enjoy it, and I would recommend it as just a romance novel. But yeah, I will link that in the show notes. Like I said, be warned, it is a super, super slow burn, so you have to be willing to make the commitment.
Aren't you like 100K in before there's like any actual romance
before like anything happens?
Yeah.
But
it's like
trust
a building
me,
that turns into a romance, but they really are building up to it.
So worth it.
Yeah,
like, that's the thing. If you can make the commitment and hang in there for the long haul, it is super worth it.
And you don't need to know anything about that fandom to enjoy that.
No, you don't even know. You don't know anything about the sport of hockey. You don't need to know anything about anybody. It literally like
you'll enjoy it slightly more maybe
it doesn't matter
if you know who people are, but you really don't need to know. Chelsea,
you really don't need to know. I had no idea. Okay, well, I think that's everything. So we will go ahead and talk about the book that we picked for our first book, which is Ashwin by Kit Rocha. This is the first book in the new Gideon Riders series, which actually follows their Beyond series, if you've read any of those books. But this is a new book, a new series, a perfect, great starting point for hopping in if you've never read any work by them before. This book is basically about Ashwin, our title character. Ashwin Malhotra is a genetically engineered super soldier who's been engineered to be not only a lethal killing machine, but to be feelingless and to have no feelings, and to work for the super oppressive capital. Only there's been war against the capital, and now he's infiltrating essentially the first family of District 1, the Royal Rios family, who are royalty. They are gods, they are prophets. There's a lot of complicated family dynamics there. And the only person that Ashwin is really concerned about is Cora. Cora Bellamy is a doctor. She used to take care of him on the base when he was a soldier. And now that she's also helping the Rios family, he's torn between his mission and his heart, and he has to learn how to feel. And it is super great and super hot.
Full disclosure, Chelsea and I are both online bros with the writing team here. So we did receive advanced readers copies for review consideration. We did not pay for these. Thank you, Brie and Donna. They are both awesome. And
yes. And then, yes, to clarify, Kit Rocha is 2 people.
Yeah, it's a writing team. They're best friends, and they met in X-Men fandom, which I'm not fanishly outing them. They've talked about that repeatedly, and that just makes me really happy.
And it's super adorable.
I do want to mention we're not generally going to be reading from advanced reader copies. This just happens to be a case of we had them for this and we love this book so much we wanted to tell you about it. I did actually already have this pre-ordered when Brie asked if I wanted an
I did as well.
and
I actually, and I was actually turned on to Kit by Kay wrecking me some of her books, and then I went to buy the whole first thing. So that's another interesting thing I want to mention is that I read the series that came before this one very, very recently. Within the last couple of months, and I read it all in one go. It's like 8 novels and 5 novellas and 2 short stories or something like that. It's a crazy amount of writing, and I read it very, very quickly.
It's a great binge read if you want to binge read.
It's so good. Like, it is incredibly easy to read that quickly. Like, it's super great, but it's been a little bit since you've read them, and you read them as they were coming out.
As they were coming out. And I did not meet Brie until like last fall. So like as they were wrapping up the series. So I had already been a longtime fan and I got you turned on to them. But see, we read the last book of the last series and then it was several months until we read this one. And I haven't read most of the books in ages.
In a
I'm
while,
coming to this more like a new reader would be coming to this, not remembering a ton of details or outside stuff, and I think this is eminently readable from a new reader perspective. But as a fan of the other books, I like seeing the occasional glimpse of previous characters, and also the world building was already there and in place and super solid. But I think that you get definitely enough information that you're not coming into this blind if you haven't read the first series.
Yeah, it definitely stands well enough on its own as an independent introduction to kind of what's happening. It's a little tricky to talk about because kind of like setting up the world building for this book kind of spoils the last couple or the last book of the previous series in a way.
I feel like we can just go there. I feel like we can just
it's
go
whatever.
There.
So
We're
basically the last book of
and like you can, if you don't want to be spoiled for anything that Kit Rocha has written in this universe, you need to stop listening now and go to the next timestamp.
Yeah.
Okay.
So at the end of the Beyond series, there's a war against basically the capital, and the capital falls, and all of the surrounding sectors are rebuilding for more, basically. So that's where we are when we recenter on book 1. Previously in the Beyond series, we were hanging out over in Sector 4 with the O'Kanes, but now we are hanging out with the Rios family. And if you read the Beyond series, you know there are some Rios family members in the O'Kane clan. So there's definitely, like Kay said, some really cool like character crossover, and there are some familiar faces and familiar names floating around.
And both of the leads of this book have appeared previously.
Yes.
But fairly minor. I think Cora shows up like in a couple of scenes. Same with Ashwin.
She shows up to save my dear sweet baby.
Yeah.
My babies. And it's so good.
But
what's also really nice is their introduction is recapped in this book as well. So there's and it's handled really nicely. It doesn't read like an info dump, but there is almost like a little flashback to the first time that if you had not read the Beyond books, they do kind of provide that context. But yeah, so let's talk. So that's a little bit about the plot and kind of how it interacts with the Beyond books. But let's talk about this book as an erotica book and as a romance novel.
And it is definitely speculative fiction. It's not like post-apocalyptic, except it is. Like the apocalypse has already happened. They are rebuilding.
I really like it because it's a very interesting look at tech versus not tech, versus like having to rebuild when you know what technology is, but you just don't have the tools you need to access it. So there's, like you said, a lot of really cool, like speculative world building kind of stuff, but there's also a lot of really cool focus in this book, particularly on religion and how religion can work in building community and building power structures and gender structures. And
there's super interesting like sociological, cultural anthropology type stuff where they're talking about like things that are signifiers of status, where it's almost reverse of what you would think, like in the sort of palace where they live, they use candles. And, like, that's a symbol of status because instead of using, like, solar-powered or whatever lights, like, they're using, like, handmade fucking candles because they have the money and
like,
time
enough to light
that.
their house. Like,
to light the house. And it's just, like, really interesting, like, even from that perspective.
And it's very interesting because there's a lot of really cool stuff in the book about souls and the emotional burden one bears when it comes to like murder, even if that is murder in defense of one's family or home or country. So the writers themselves get these tattoos, these little, basically, they're ravens, right? Or birds?
Yeah, so they've got
some kind.
Start out with the tree with bare branches, except for Ashwin, who gets some budding leaves because he's I know.
Which is like one of those little details that once you've read the book you just remember it and you're like, oh,
because there's a tattoo artist. Is it Dell? Is that her name?
It's Dell. I think so. Yeah.
So the tattoo artist can like, they're not saying it's mystical, but they're not saying it's mystical, where she can like see into you and like know.
Yeah, she's just like super intuitive.
Super intuitive.
Like it's not like
maybe empathic. We don't know. But so like most people, like you don't pick your tattoo, she will pick your tattoo.
She gives it to you.
And
yeah,
all
exactly.
of the writers get the same, at least one of the same ones, where it's the tree, and then for every kill they have a bird tattooed on them. And it's not like a mark of status, it's like you are being marked by the deaths.
Yeah, it's like a burden. And that's the interesting thing, is like, as opposed to it being like a notch on your belt as we would normally think of it, it's like a memorial almost. And it's a visual representation of, in their, as Sector 1 views it, as all of the sins they are taking upon themselves so that the innocent don't have to.
Yeah. Like, they believe they go to purgatory. Like, when you sign up for the writers, you are giving up your place in the afterlife that they, like, collectively believe in. And they think they're all going to be in purgatory. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Which is also an interesting point to talk about, the fact that the Rios family is basically the family of the prophets. And Sector 1 has formed a religion around the Rios family. So there's a lot of really cool and interesting stuff in there about the responsibility that one bears to their community when one is seen that way, but also how being seen that way can put a burden on a person.
And he's not,
and it was just a very interesting
god
aspect.
King or a prophet, but like he's seen sort of as like the chosen leader, whereas like previous members of his family were, it sounds like megalomaniacal, like purposefully like basically the leader we have in the book, his grandfather purposefully basically kind of formed a cult around himself. He was this kind of enigmatic guy who purposefully cast himself in this godlike role, and now his family and his descendants are kind of not stuck in that, but also stuck in that kind of place in their community. So it's just a very interesting aspect to something you wouldn't necessarily expect to see in what is an erotica novel or a romance novel. I would not call this erotica in the way that I would, I mean,
that you would like the Beyond series.
Like the Beyond series, I say is definitely more erotica, and this may transition into that. But I think,
no, I mean, I definitely feel like that's accurate. I definitely feel like the first ones were far more explicit and erotic than this one was.
This one is very tonally different in a way that I actually quite enjoyed. And the environment that these characters are in is just very different, despite it taking place in the same universe. And the way that they interact is very different also.
Yeah. And they do a really good job balancing that, of giving us those glimpses of what we've already established, so it still feels familiar, but also like Sector 1 is very tonally different. Like the leaders in charge have created a very different environment from what we've known previously. So I think that's why part of why it works so well as a starting point for a whole new thing that's happening.
Definitely.
And then, so let's talk about Cora and Ashwin a little bit. I just like, okay, it sounds so corny to say that the plot is literally about a super soldier who is dead inside and learns to love again, but that is what it is about, and it's so good.
Yeah, so Ashwin's a super soldier, but like less Captain America, more Winter Soldier. So
yes, it's very dark.
Yeah, they're genetically designed and then like raised on a military base and basically told they aren't really human and don't have feelings. And
yeah,
if
like they're forbidden from feeling
feelings. They're basically put in a cell and periodically taken out to be tortured until they stop having those feelings.
Yeah.
Which at the start of this book, Ashwin has just finished 6 months of that before being
a voluntary torture.
Voluntary torture, so he will stop being obsessed with Cora.
It's
many feelings. Oh my
explained.
God.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is like the Mackay Project, which like that's the name of the kind of experiment or whatever that's producing people like Ashwin.
It's their super soldier
it's
program.
super dark. Yeah, it's super dark. And it's interesting because we learn at the end of the book that Cora is also a product of this same experiment, but the opposite. So whereas Ashwin is made to not feel and is raised and programmed and preconditioned to think he has no feelings, Cora is preconditioned to be made of high levels of like compassion and intuition.
Yeah, like
and
almost an empath.
Yeah, like an empath. And so like so her part of the program was created to be a counterbalance to his part. But here's the thing. Everybody
really
in her
want
part of the
those.
program, like everybody in her part of the program, due to their high levels of emotion and empathy, basically has breakdowns and can't handle it.
Yeah, can't handle.
And so
patch up these poor emotionless automatons.
Because the people in charge of this shit are monsters. It's such good world building.
I mean,
but anyway,
right prior to the book, there was a coup, so there's like new leadership now. So we don't really know if the people who are in charge now are as monstrous. And
that's true.
We think probably not, because basically this whole book is kicked into action when Ashwin is supposed to go basically undercover and like ingratiate himself with Gideon's riders. And he finds out later he was probably sent to make sure that their leader wasn't gonna go crazy like his granddad.
Yeah.
And that doesn't sound like a bad mission to me, but also like, you know, they're still not great people.
Well, I mean, you know, like obviously they're still using their super soldiers and they aren't above putting Ashwin through like 7 months of torture.
Yeah.
I mean, so there's still that part of it operating. But yes, there is a new leadership in charge, and there are reasons to think that there is, if nothing else, a battle between kind of the old and the new leadership as to what path things are going to go down. So there's the potential for things to shift in terms of just how awful that particular leadership is. I just really like Cora. Like I just really, really like her. She's like, not only is she incredibly empathetic, but she's incredibly smart
and strong.
And she's incredibly strong in this way that is an alternative strength. And that's one of the things I love so much about Kit Rocha's books, their books in general, is that they explore all various kinds of strength as it relates to being a female.
All of their heroines are so different.
So
different. And they're heroes too. But like, I'm especially always impressed with how different.
Well, and I'll go out on a limb to say that like these books are about the ladies. Like they may be named for the men, and the men obviously definitely get their storylines, but these books are about the females in them and the way that the females in them are interacting with everything else around them.
And can we take a moment to talk about like how amazing their descriptions of emotions are? Because like emotions are such a weird, intangible thing to try to describe, and like they do it so well.
They do it so well.
And so constantly in all these beautifully quiet moments and in so many different ways. Like, not just in the middle of a love scene, just in, like, tiny gestures between characters.
Well, and that's the thing, right, is that it's beautiful. And it's not just, like, it's all of the things we've already said, and it's also super hot, and it's all of that, but it's also just really poignant and a really good meditation on so many things that you might be surprised to kind of find it meditating on. The difference between, nature versus nurture, and can you change the person you've always been, and how does that change affect the other people in your life, and all of these really kind of bigger things. And it just does it so beautifully, and through, like you said, all these smaller details. They're the leaves on the tree, right? Like that's the thing. It's those little details like that. Like, and I love that this whole, like, the whole Beyond universe, like everything, the tattoos in them and body art and art in general is super important.
Art
and
is
super
very important.
Yes. And it's super metaphoric and symbolic in ways that operate.
And also it's very utilitarian and part of everyone's daily life, regardless of class and circumstance, which I love. I love that so much.
And like we said, especially in this book, the tattoo artists, and also Ace in the Beyond series, just in general, those tattoo artists, there's something about them that always is a little, like we were saying, kind of borderline magical. There's something about having that artistic insight into people that you're able to kind of pull some kind of truth out of that. And that's just another set of details and world building that I think really is awesome.
I have so many fucking things highlighted in this ebook. So Ashwin says, how do you know if something is beautiful if you find satisfaction in looking at it? Your heart races, or it's hard to breathe, or you just have to stop for a minute and marvel at how perfect the universe is to have created something like that. And Ashwin says, there's like some other stuff in there. Then I never saw beauty before I saw you. And then Chelsea cried, I am sure.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
There's also this really good one about, so there's a point where Ashwin is sparring with Anna, who is the first woman to be a member of the writers. And this is Ashwin thinking, from a historical standpoint, he understood the cultural prohibition against hitting women. It was an erroneous conclusion springing from good intentions. The idea that the powerful shouldn't perpetuate violence against the weak. The flaw was insisting that physical power followed arbitrary gender lines inherently, instead of being the result of systemic lack of access to training, opportunity, and encouragement. Yes! Yes.
So good.
The relationship discussions in Kit Rocha's books are always amazing. There's always really frank talk about consent, enthusiastic consent.
Yes.
There's always frank talk about relationship expectations and like what each person is bringing to the relationship baggage-wise, because we all bring our baggage with us to our relationships, romantic and otherwise, which they touch on, the non-romantic relationship baggage stuff as well, which I so appreciate. The friendships in these are just as important as the romantic relationships.
Yeah. And often that's usually what's at stake for a lot of these characters, is if they make a certain decision with relationships, they will lose out on so much of this social network and these friendships. And so that conflict, there's just a lot of found family feelings in these books. And that is like a thing for both of us.
You're going to really notice in like most of our book picks. That's a thing.
That's reoccurring theme. You'll see it. But lots of really good stuff in here with that. And that comes across both in like the brotherhood of the writers, but also of all the females in Sector 1, and just across the kind of the Beyond universe. Like we saw a lot of in Sector 4, like micro financing of female-led businesses by other females, and like super rad like educational opportunities provided, and like life skills, and just so like it's really awesome,
the world
like
building
feminist stuff and world building and economics and stuff,
which is another reason I don't understand why people don't read romance, because the world building is just phenomenal.
And on that note, I think we're good. Did you have anything else? Any other big favorite parts or anything? Okay, cool. Well, in that case, our next episode is going to be a super special Hugo's episode. We are just going to jump right into talking about the nominees. And then the week after that, we will be back with another book talk, and we will be talking about The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. Yes. So much excitement for both of those things. Thank you so much for stopping by for our first episode. As always, you can come find us all over the internet. Come look at the show notes and also check out the transcript. We are always looking forward to talking to you guys, and we'll see you in a week.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Please do not get murdered on our podcast recording, our first one. Please.